Hello and good afternoon. We're so happy to have you here today. Thank you for coming to today's program. My name is Erin Payton, and I'm the Executive Director of the 19th Century Charitable Association, which is located in Oak Park, Illinois. Our mission is strengthening our community through learning, giving, and sharing our landmark building. Before we get started, I just wanted to let you know that if something during the program sparks a question or a comment, you can go ahead and leave that either in our chat or in our Q&A. And if there's time at the end of the program, we will unmute you and you can ask the question yourself. Right now, I am going to bring to the program Diane Moses, our program chair.
Hi, thank you. American history comes to life in the hands of dramatist RJ Lindsey through extensive research, meticulous attention to detail, and the use of documented speeches. Letters and anecdotes of vivid living portrait emerges. 35 years of experience as a researcher, writer, and actor have contributed to the success of the living history programs, which have been seen from Jerusalem to London to the Democratic National Convention. As a theatrical professional, Lindsey has appeared on stage and television. He earned a master's degree from Illinois State University and is a member of Actors Equity, the Screen Actors Guild, and the American Federation of Television and Radio Artists. Please join me in welcoming RJ Lindsey.
Well, hello everyone. I hope you can hear me. This is technology I did not invent, so it's a little slow sometimes. I was introduced this way one time. It has been said that George Washington was first in war, first in peace, and first in the hearts of his countrymen. And Benjamin Franklin was first in everything else. He was founder of the first first Philadelphia lending library, public hospital, fire department, the first American inventor, entrepreneur, and the greatest diplomat ever. Well, such an introduction might certainly inflate one's ego, which takes me back to my youth. When I was 20, I embarked upon a project of moral perfection to achieve 12 virtues: order, frugality, industry, moderation, and so on. Then a Quaker friend of mine kindly informed me that my pride showed itself frequently, so I added humility to my list. But pride is difficult to subdue, isn't it? Disguise it, struggle with it, it's still alive and may peep out and show itself. And even if I could conceive that I had completely overcome it, I should be proud of my humility. July 29th, 1750. I wrote my friend Peter Collinson in London to determine the question whether the clouds that contain lightning are electrified or not. Now, that's the same kind of electricity. If you walk across a rug in the wintertime and touch the door latch, you get a spark. I would propose an experiment which I described as the sentry box experiment, which was published in Europe. And then 2 years later, France, May 10th, 1752 at 2:20 p.m. Thunder, hail. A 40-foot pointed iron rod rises from the sentry box. Gripping a small glass bottle with a brass wire protruding from one end, Monsieur Coiffier touches the wire to the iron rod. A spark crackles before him, and my theory is proved. And that spark in France propelled the American Revolution to success. The French experiment proving my theory may be a hero to all of France, allowing my diplomatic mission as ambassador to the French court of Louis XVI to succeed. France sent its navy and army to Yorktown, assisting General Washington to defeat British General Cornwallis, resulting in the formation of the United States of America. I did it. You're welcome. Well, the general and I, perhaps. John Adams once said this: the history of our revolution will be one continual lie from one end to the other. The essence of the whole will be that Dr. Franklin's electric rod smote the earth and out sprang General Washington. And then Franklin electrified him. And thenceforth, these two conducted all the policy, negotiations, and the war. If I were in Congress and this gentleman, Mr. Franklin, and the marble Mercury in the Garden of Versailles were in nomination for an embassy, I would give my vote to the statue upon the principle it would do no harm. I would say this about Mr. Adams. He's always an honest man, often a wise one, but sometimes and in some ways absolutely out of his senses. If you not be forgotten, when you're dead and rotten, either write things worth reading or do things worth the writing. Philadelphia, October 6, 1723. I made a 400-mile trip from Boston, nearly shipwrecked by a storm, walked 50 miles across New Jersey, helped row a boat down the Delaware River. I was a bedraggled 17-year-old printer's apprentice runaway. I stepped onto the Philadelphia wharf, determined to make my own way in the world. 55 years later, France, the Versailles Palace, March 20, 1778. The usher scratches on the royal bedchamber door. Now, in France, you never knock on the royal door, you scratch, yes. A few days before, as America's ambassador, I'd signed the Treaty of Alliance with France, and now that runaway printer's apprentice would have an audience with King Louis XVI. I think I did all right. My life is centered on 4 cities: Boston, Philadelphia, London, and Paris. Boston, 1706. Population, 5,000. My father, Josiah. My mother, Abiah Folger. There were 17 children total in the family from first and second wife. First wife had passed on. 1,000 ships are registered in the harbor master. My father's trade, candle and soap making. Oh, I was not inclined to that dull, smelly business. 7 sisters and 5 brothers survived, and of the 6 boys, I was to be my father's tithe to the Lord and be educated as a minister. So when I was 8, he sent me to South Grammar School for the purpose, but there were clues I might not be suited to be a cleric. At mealtime, my father always recited long, long grace. So one day, while he was preparing the barrel of salt pork for winter, I said it would save a lot of time if you would bless the whole barrel now. By age 10, my education was finished. Philadelphia, 1728. George House is walking along the street. A countryman asks directions to a printer. George, a friend of mine, sends him to me. Hugh Meredith and I had started our own print shop. His father loaned the money. I'm 22. I charged the man 5 shillings, our first fruits, and those 5 shillings gave me more pleasure than any crown I have earned since. 4 years later, I began to publish the Almanac. You're familiar with it. Now, I created the pseudonym of Richard Saunders as the writer. I'm just the printer and folder. Therefore, I cannot be blamed for whatever Richard writes. Almanacs provide information: calendar, eclipses, planetary motions, rise and set of the moon, the tides, very important for shipping. And I added witty verses and jests and sayings I borrowed from all ages and all sources. Now, you know some of them. Early to bed, early to rise makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise. A countryman between 2 lawyers is like a fish between 2 cats. Fish and guests stink after 3 days. Keep your eyes wide open before marriage, half shut afterwards. I published for 25 years, 10,000 copies a year. There were 2 other printers in Philadelphia, Andrew Bradford, Samuel Keimer, both men poorly qualified. I was determined to surpass them. Did they supply paper? I helped start 18 paper mills and became the largest paper wholesaler in the colonies. Rag supplier, papers made from used rags. Over 15 years, I collected 120,000 pounds of rags and sold them to the paper mills. I offered people hard money, not barter. I'll give you hard money. Government contracts, Bradford had the contract, but printed a government document in a coarse, blundering manner. I reprinted it elegantly and correctly, and I got the contract. Newspapers, Bradford's is just dull. Keimer's is incompetent. Now, if you want to express an opinion anonymously, use a pseudonym. So I created 2, Martha Careful and Sheila Shortface. They were writing a letter of outrage to Keimer because he wanted to write an article on every letter of the alphabet. He started with A, and A is abortion. Oh. These women said if he speaks anything more about our privates, we will see him on the street and pull his beard. His readership left him, had no credit, many debts. He sold the paper to me for a trifle and escaped to Barbados. I made the paper account for half my profits and the most popular paper in the colonies. Letters to the editor? I create a pseudonym that sends the letter in, and then as the editor, I answer it. It's perfect. When Bradford was postmaster of Philadelphia, he would not allow his post riders to deliver my newspaper. I had to bribe him. So when I became postmaster, he had to bribe my post riders to carry his paper. It's business. When an apprentice would complete his contract, I would assist him in setting up a business, especially out of town. They were a 6-year contract. I supplied the press and the type and paid 1/3 of the expenses and took 1/3 of the profits. My publications would be sold through the shops. At the end of a 6-year contract, the printer could buy the press and type for me and go independent or renew the contract. When my business partner, Louis Timothy in Charleston, South Carolina, died, his wife Elizabeth took over the printing business. She managed it with great success, far better than her husband ever did. Age 42, I retired from business, had my portrait attired as a gentleman. Now, this is very important. I was born into a very structured British society, gentleman class on the top, commoners on the bottom. It was believed that hard work was for the common people. It instilled in them proper moral values. The lower class must be kept poor or they will never be industrious. Shoemakers, printers, all who worked with their hands, no matter how wealthy, how many employees, could never be considered gentlemen. Young, aspiring gentlemen were encouraged by their parents to study poetry, play musical instruments, dress fashionably, take up dancing and fencing to contribute to a graceful carriage, and have their portraits painted. I love a good hoax. And so I created a hoax. This is good. I want to comment on the unequal treatment in the courts of men and women and the rich and the poor. Men get off, women get sentenced. The rich get off, the poor get sentenced. So appearing in the General Advertiser in London, my pseudonym character, Polly Baker, appeared before a New England court for having a 5th illegitimate child. Now, women would be whipped and fined, but the father would not be punished. She speaks at great length, and here's the gist. I have brought 5 children into the world at the risk of my life and have maintained them through my own industry, which I could have done better if you'd not fined me so much for the other 4. Can it be a crime to add to the king's subjects? First time I was a virgin, trusting, unhappily I lost my honor. He got me with a child and then forsook me. He's now a magistrate. I must complain, unjust, unequal. You believe I have offended heaven and must suffer eternal fire. Will that not be sufficient? What is the need for additional fines and whipping? Gentlemen, I call it a duty. 'Tis the duty of the first command of nature and of nature's God. Increase and multiply. Instead of a whipping, a statue should be erected to my memory. And in the article I wrote, the speech was so convincing that Polly was set free and one of the judges married her the next day. For 30 years, readers thought it actually had happened. It'd always been a question whether lightning and electricity were the same. So I said, let the experiment be done. No one else ever had. Philadelphia, 1752, June. The skies darken. A storm approaches. My kite is in the air, and my 21-year-old son, William, is with me. We back into the doorway of a barn to keep from getting wet. The kite string is tied to a key. A wire from the key goes to a Leyden jar. A silk ribbon is tied to the key. I hold the insulating ribbon while flying the kite. The storm passes over. The negative charge travels down the string to the jar. I move my knuckle close to the key. My positive charged body attracts the negative charged key and a spark jumps to me. The kite has proved it. Now, my apparatus for creating electricity uses a glass globe. When cranked, rubs against a leather pad, which charges the globe with the electrical fire. With metal points, the charge is drawn off and stored in a Leyden jar. Metal foil on the inside and out. Negative fire accumulates inside, positive on the outside. You'll get a spark with a rod touching the outside and the top rod. The electrical fire flows from the jar. Now, one time, I was holding the jar and accidentally touched that top rod and was knocked unconscious by the shock. I might have been killed, as many have been. And what would have happened to the revolution then, without me? Well, there's my vanity again. To store a larger charge for experimentation, I connected a series of Leyden jars. I call it a battery. It reminds me of the Cannon battery at Lower Manhattan. To explain my findings, I needed some new terminology: positive, negative, charge, battery, plus and minus. I realized Electricity is not made or destroyed, it's just moved around. As a result, I designed my most famous invention, the lightning rod. Churches were often hit, so they would bless the bell with holy water and ring it during a storm to drive the lightning away. Unfortunately, many bell ringers were killed. If your house was struck by lightning and burned, the fire company would save the houses on either side of yours, but not yours, because it was God's will that yours was burning. So my lightning rod was heretical. I said, if the Lord does not object to our putting a roof over us to protect us from rain and snow, should he not object to protecting our families from lightning strikes? In 1755, there was a small earthquake, and the clergy said, God showed his displeasure toward me and my lightning rod by directing his anger into the ground and making it shake. The lightning rod will begin to change our relationship between nature and superstition, but it will not change easily. By retiring at 42, I can indulge my natural curiosity about the world. People were interested in what happened and how it worked in the world. Microscopes, barometers, and air pumps were sold for use at home. 2 books are very important. Newton's Optics. Newton encouraged readers to perform experiments. Desaguliers. He pictured instruments and how to operate them. So all my experiments and conclusions about electricity were published in Europe, and I was invited to become a member of the Royal Society of London. Electricity had been mostly entertainment. What they would do is they would have several courtiers lined up in the front of the king, and they would send a shock through several of them, all holding hands, and they would all jump up at once. Oh, Louis XV enjoyed that much. Or you had a swing. Silk ribbon goes up. A small child is placed on the swing. They crank up the electrical apparatus. One man holds the wire. Then he touches the child's hand, and the current is going through him. Another man on the other side with the other child's hand, and his other hand is over chaff, these little pieces of paper that are attracted to his hand. Entertainment. After me, it became a science. In 1753, the Royal Society of London presented me with the Copley Medal. Along the way, a few other inventions, no royalties. I received benefits from others' inventions, so I freely give mine to the benefit of all. Of course, the Pennsylvania stove, they started calling it the Franklin stove. The long arm retriever, some of you may be using a long arm retriever. That's to get books off high shelves. And now this chair on the other side, there's a little treadle at the bottom and a little fan at the top. So when you're reading in the summertime, you can get a little air moving across you. I also made swim fins and a flexible catheter. Now here's something you may be familiar with. I was tired of having to switch glasses. I want to look at my food, but then across a wide table in France, I need to see what the people were saying. I need to see their mouth moving because my French is a little awkward. So we just took a lens from each, and there we have bifocals. You're welcome. 1753, I was appointed Royal Deputy Postmaster for the Colonies. We made improvements. Postal service extended to Canada with faster service. A letter sent from Philadelphia to Boston could receive a reply within 6 days. A round trip to New York in 24 hours. And I operated the Postal Service at a profit. I made a 7-month tour of offices from Virginia to New Hampshire. These post offices in the area they were in gave me a view, not of individual colonies, but of something larger with common interests, something they couldn't see individually. A printer must be able to read, write, and edit. I can't remember a time when I couldn't read. Any extra money was laid aside for books. By age 12, I was fascinated by Plutarch's Lives and John Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress. Daniel Defoe's essay upon projects, this was community projects for London, an example of individual make a difference. The most influential book I read was written by Cotton Mather, the leading Boston minister. His Bonifacius Essays to Do Good, I read. If I have been a useful citizen, the public owes the advantage of that to that book. Mather had 3,000 books in his library, and I would visit. One day, as I was taking my leave, Reverend Mather hollered out at me, "Stoop, Benjamin, stoop!" I kept talking, ran my head into a low beam across the doorway. Never to miss a moral lesson. Cotton Mather said, "You are young and have the world before you. Stoop as you go through it, and you will miss many hard thumps. The noblest question in the world is, what good may I do in it?" Fires were a continual danger, so a group of us formed the volunteer fire company, each man to bring 2 leather buckets and a large linen bag. The bag was to save household possessions, not only from the fire, but from any burglar who might be trying to get in the back way. We also started a fire insurance company. Books were expensive, so I started the first subscription library in Philadelphia. For a yearly fee, members could have access to the library's collection, and the fees went to purchase more books. Dr. Thomas Bond came to me. He said, "We need a hospital to care for the sick, poor, and the insane wandering the streets." He came to me for advice about fundraising. I suggested a new approach. We will propose to the Assembly that if we raise £2,000, then the Assembly would donate £2,000. It would get them off the hook for the total cost, and they could take credit if the scheme succeeded. There were 4 colleges in the colonies: Harvard, Yale, William and Mary, and Princeton, primarily institutions for educating the clergy and not business or public service. In my pamphlet, Proposals for the Education of Youth in Pennsylvania, I proposed a new idea teaching both the ornamental knowledge of the arts and the practical skills necessary for making a living. City number 3, London. A city of great wealth and poverty, 600,000 people. 60% of Londoners die before age 10. 2 persons died for every 1 born, but 1/3 of the population continually are new arrivals. A society of wealthy aristocrats, rich merchants, shopkeepers, artisans, resting on a huge population of beggars, sailors, prostitutes, street sellers, laborers. This is my introduction to a wider world. For 18 years, over 3 time periods, I would live in the center of the empire, which gave me a broader worldview and more diplomatic experience than any member of Congress. My first visit taught me a valuable lesson about human nature. It all began January 1724, Samuel Keimer's print shop. I was working as a journeyman printer when in walked Pennsylvania Governor Sir William Keith. He'd seen some of my writing, was impressed, thought I should be encouraged. Now, such patronage was necessary to succeed in British society. We walked to the city tavern where he suggested I should open my own print shop. He wrote a letter to my father advising him to financially support me. My father said, "Well, Benjamin, no. If by steady industry and prudent parsimony I have saved close enough by age 21 to start a business, he would help." There were several brothers, and they all needed help, so there wasn't much left for me. Well, the governor wasn't discouraged. He said he'd finance me, told me to go to London, purchase the press and type, but keep it a secret. He'd send along letters of credit. I was 18 years old. My head was in the clouds. Well, we got to London. There were no letters of credit. Others told me he had no credit to give, only expectations. That's why he said keep it a secret. I believe he's one of the best men in the world. I was stranded. I found work at Samuel Palmer's print shop. I was plunged into the London of bookshops, theater, coffee shops, all manner of topics discussed, scientific lectures held. After 17 months, I returned to the colonies with the patronage of merchant Thomas Denman, who wanted me to be accountant for his business. And then he died, and it was back to the print shop. Now, 1753, the unofficial beginning of the French and Indian War, called the 7 Years' War in Europe. This war will determine America's future. There are 3 major powers. England, France, and Spain hold the territory. Spain, southwest, the Florida, and Mexico. France, Louisiana, southern Canada. Britain, northern Canada, the 13 colonies. In 1756, France and Britain will officially declare war, becoming a world war with France, Austria, Russia, Saxony, Sweden, and Spain on one side, and Prussia, Great Britain, and Hanover on the other side. You can see the English royal family is German. The French and their Indian allies are attacking settlements on the Pennsylvania frontier. So the British send General Braddock to command the North American forces against the French. I thought he had a little too much self-confidence. And I warned him about Indian ambushes. The general replied, "These savages may be a formidable enemy to your raw militia, But upon the king's regular and disciplined troops, sir, it is impossible they would make an impression. Oh. He confidently marches west. July 9, 1755, the French and Indians make quite an impression. 2/3 of Braddock's troops are killed. Braddock himself is mortally wounded. His last words, "Who would have thought it?" I did. The Penn family would not pay their taxes. William Penn had loaned King Charles II a substantial sum of money. The king repaid the debt by giving Penn a charter for lands in North America that became the colony of Pennsylvania. This is a proprietary colony. The Penn family, the proprietors. They sell off land, create a revenue stream, but pay no taxes. There are also royal colonies and commercial colonies. The Assembly and Governor Morris had a running battle regarding the Penns. We discovered there was a secret agreement between the Penns and their appointed governors to block any taxes. In total frustration with the governor, the Assembly sent me to London to negotiate directly with Thomas and Richard Penn. This is my second stay in London. I have been of opinions that the foundations of the future grandeur and stability of the British Empire lie in America. After attending the coronation of King George III, I predicted His Majesty's reign would be happy and truly glorious. I was a proud Englishman and an ardent empire man. February 10, 1763, the Seven-Year War's treaty is signed. France loses. Britain gets Canada and the Ohio Valley from France. France gives Louisiana to Spain. France is removed from North America. The stage is set for the American Revolution. My meetings with the Penns went nowhere. Thomas Penn was a miserable churl. I think he believed that by having appointed me as royal deputy postmaster of the colonies with his approval would make me compliant as it had with the governors he appointed. He was quite mistaken. I don't believe he could grasp the idea of performing public service for the good of the country. And I have written, a rich rogue is like a fat hog who never does good till he's dead as a log. Otherwise, thoroughly enjoying London, attending the theater, joining clubs, traveling, meeting prominent citizens, Scottish philosopher David Hume, chemist Joseph Priestley, potter Josiah Wedgwood, Dr. Erasmus Darwin. I considered staying in London forever. 5 years, it was time to go home. Same tax troubles with the new governor. 2 years later, I am back in London, my third stay. In France, the foreign minister seeks revenge against Britain. In Britain, 60% of the government's budget goes to pay interest on the war debt. Spending has to be cut, revenues raised, 10,000 soldiers are needed to protect the new frontier in the colonies. Who will pay? Why, the British thought the colonies would. So they passed the Stamp Act. All printed paper, books, almanacs, newspapers, legal documents, even playing cards must be stamped. Now, this would fall heavily on newspapers and lawyers. There are two groups you do not want to antagonize. That's lawyers and newspaper editors. We saw that as taxation without representation. Historically, the king goes to Parliament to request taxes on the people. We had no representation in Parliament, although the British said, you have virtual representation. There are people just like you over here. We said, no. We colonial agents met with Prime Minister. We suggested the king request the taxes of the assemblies. I proposed increasing paper money at 6%. The government could collect the money. It would only affect the wealthy. I always look for a compromise. I suggested appointing Americans to collect the taxes and the people would gradually accept it. Well, I could never have been more wrong about that. The people were outraged. By September, after much agitation, newspaper editorials and pamphlets, the people rioted. I sent a letter saying I tried to prevent the passage. No one believed me. They blamed me for it. My reputation was ruined. I focused too much on the pins and not the taxes, and I was out of touch with the people. A mob gathers to burn my house. My wife gets her musket. Her relatives and several of our friends bring guns for defense, and a crowd of my supporters arrives and the mob disbands. The Sons of Liberty, operated by Sam Adams, demolished the Boston governor's house. I wrote letters and published articles attempting to restore my reputation, but Americans thought I was too British and the British thought I was too American. 1767, the Townshend Acts. New taxes, lead, paint, glass, and tea imports. I had counseled that Americans objected to internal taxes, but external taxes, they would be acceptable. Wrong again, Ben. More protest. All taxes were rescinded except the symbolic tea tax. resulting in the Boston Tea Party. There were several tea parties held up and down the coast. Boston is the most memorable. I had even one of my friends appointed as a tax collector. He wrote me and said, "Thanks very much, Ben. I nearly got hanged last night." I had a laboratory in my home on Craven Street. I studied lead poisoning, magnetism, the common cold. I made many trips in the country. In Whitehaven, I visited the first coal mine dug under the sea. Machinery included a pump to remove water. I went down 4,800 feet. The mine went several miles farther. I noticed the slate forming the roof of the mine was impressed with the figures of leaves and branches of ferns, which undoubtedly grew at the surface when the slate was in the state of sand at the banks of the sea. It appears this vein of coal had suffered a prodigious settlement. On another excursion to the high country of Derby, at the lowest part of a rocky mountain, oyster shells were mixed with a stone, probably as high above the sea as the coal mine is below. There must have been a great upheaval, raising some parts above and depressing other parts below the sea. Therefore, I imagine that the internal parts of the globe may be a fluid more dense and of greater specific gravity than any of the solids we are acquainted with, which therefore might swim in or in that fluid. Thus, the surface of the globe would be a shell capable of being broken by the violent movement of the fluid on which it rested. Appalachian Mountains also has seashells. It's a wreck of a world we live in. The House of Commons, I presented the colonial position. Many of the 175 questions were scripted by Lord Rockingham, a sympathizer with the colonies. They asked, what if a military force was sent? I replied, you'll find nobody in arms. They cannot force a man to take stamps. They will not find rebellion, but they may indeed make one. 2-hour performance, and my reputation was restored. The colonies, non-importation agreements, British imports dwindled. British business complained. When there's money involved, they complain. The Stamp Act was repealed. And then a most interesting situation. Anonymously, I received some 20 letters sent by Governor Hitchinson of Pennsylvania to the now deceased Thomas Whatley, former assistant to Prime Minister Grenville. The letters gave advice on how to subdue the colonial unrest, including sending more troops. I sent them to Pennsylvania Assembly Speaker Thomas Cushing with the admonition, do not make these public. Always seeking reconciliation, I thought if colonials saw that the governor was the cause of our troubles, they would look more kindly on the British government. Wrong again, then. John and Sam Adams saw the letters and immediately published them, causing wrath in the colonies and making my position in England untenable. One of the most transformational events of my life is about to happen. The time came. What we wanted to do was to petition the Privy Council to take responsibility for the colony away from the pens and give it to the king as a royal colony. Solicitor General Wedderburn presiding. News of the Boston Tea Party had reached London, inflaming public opinion. I appeared in a 1-hour tirade. Wedderburn attacked me. Purloined letters, thief, forfeited all respect. I was the prime conductor of agitation against the government. He's using my electrical term. The inventor and first planner who harbored secret designs for independence. The courtiers present cheered him and jeered me. I stood stock still, no expression, no response. 10 years I had worked for reconciliation. 10 years I tried to achieve compromise. I had totally believed in the king, in the great British Empire. I did not believe men in the government would do anything to harm the empire. I was the best American friend Britain had. By alienating me, the inept British government put the empire on a collision course with disaster. On the way back, I continued my study of the Gulf Stream by taking temperature measurements at different depths. I named it and published the first map, 1770. I arrived, and 8 days later, an order for my arrest was issued in England. December 18, 1775, Philadelphia, darkness envelops the city. 4 men approached Carpenter's Hall, each from a different direction to arouse no suspicion. The window shutters had been closed to see no light. John Jay and me represent the Congressional Committee on Secret Correspondence. Francis Damon, the French librarian, will translate for Achard Bonvouliard. The French foreign minister sent Bonvouliard to ascertain the state of the colonies. We met 3 times. I knew we would need the help of a foreign power. We had to convince the French to help. The envoy returned to France and made his report. He said this: colonial army had besieged Montreal, were closing in on Quebec, well entrenched around Boston, giving siege. Reality, the British burned anything of use in Montreal, and Quebec would be a disaster. taking Canada would fail. The colonial army at Boston enlistments was running out. The British Army could have lifted the siege easily if they had bothered to leave their warm quarters. The envoy said the soldiers are well clothed, fed, and paid. 50,000 regular soldiers. Reality? No uniforms, no supplies, no money. The Army had only 18,000 men, and with the enlistments running out, would soon be down to 5,000. I can't imagine how he was so misinformed. After the Declaration of Independence was published, I was selected for the committee to draft a constitution for Pennsylvania. I favored a president and a Supreme Executive Council of 12 for executive decisions instead of a governor, a single House Assembly, representatives elected from every city and county. Two houses would fight each other, cause delays, promote factions, government paralysis. A two-house legislature is like a two-headed snake trying to reach a brook for a drink. It had to pass through a hedge, but was blocked by a twig. One head wanted to go to the right, the other to the left, and consequently, before a decision was completed, the poor snake died of thirst. The criticisms of me, my ideas smacked of simple democracy and popular radicalism. Now, here was the conventional thinking. The best constitution was mixed and balanced. So you have the monarchy, the king, in our case, the governor. The aristocracies, the House of Lords, in this case, the senators. The democracy, the House of Commons, and the House of Representatives. House of Representatives was put there to prevent mob government. I was so disparaged, you know what they called me? The worst you could, a Democrat. Yes. John Adams studied our Constitution and he didn't like it. In an ancient Greek play, when an impossible situation arose, when seemingly no possible solution to the plot, the stage crane rolls out, an actor playing a god is lowered into the play to solve the dilemma, the Deus Ex Machina. November 29, 1776. After a grueling 30-day voyage in the wintry Atlantic seas, the hopes of revolution are brought to the shores of France. No money, no credit, no munitions. We could not win the war without foreign assistance, which would not be given if we could not prove we could win the war. Impossible. So I'm dropped in as the Deus Ex Machina to provide the solution. Here are the players. British Empire is not well liked. In fact, it's hated. Now, the foreign powers that want to assist us, and we'll go ahead to, are not doing it because they love democracy or freedom or liberty or Americans. No, no, no. They're all monarchies. And they want to keep it quiet that they're going to help us, especially the Spanish. They are doing it by using us as a means to get back at Britain. And we are using them as a means to revolt against Britain. France. I had to convince the minister to sign a treaty of alliance. He had to convince the king, who was a bit reluctant. But Vergennes wanted revenge against Britain and to recover lost North American territory. He would proceed secretly, waiting for Washington to win something. And the Spanish. French and Spanish are related through the French Bourbon line. Spain wants Gibraltar back. The British want from British and also Florida back. Spain will loan money secretly, open Havana Harbor. The Spanish governor in New Orleans sends supplies up the Mississippi. Governor Johannes Graaf, when our ship came, the Dutch just love, hating other people, especially against the British. A little smuggling. What's a little smuggling? He gave an 11-gun salute to our ship, the first time a country in the world acknowledged the separate United States. I had to perform many duties. Congress would ask the French for 12 million livres. And then they proceed to spend 12 when I could only get 3 million. I purchased supplies, recruited officers, engineers. I sent Lafayette to General Washington. I outfitted and commissioned privateers. You give Captain a letter of marque and reprisal, giving him the legal authority to go and capture British ships and sell the cargo. And each one of you could have bought shares in that to get part of what they earned when they sold all the cargo. Congress sent Jen Adams to help me. Oh, the puritanical, do it now, do it my way, Mr. Adams. In his mind, I led a life of dissipation. All my friends were atheists, deists, and libertines. I did nothing. He had to do all the work. His letters and meetings were so undiplomatic And eventually, the French foreign minister simply refused to see him. John Adams irritatedly took note of the French people's response to my presence in France. The ladies sort of doted on me. I didn't mind. His reputation is greater than that of Newton, Frederick the Great of Voltaire. His character more revered than any of them, said Adams. I wrote my daughter, my picture's everywhere. On the lids of snuff boxes, rings, busts, my portrait is the bestseller, copies everywhere. Oh, there was somebody that didn't care for me, and they put my portrait on the bottom of inside of a chamber pot. I was amused. Monsieur le Roi de Chaumont invited me to stay at his residence in the village of Passy outside Paris on the way to Versailles. Next door, Monsieur and the most beautiful Madame Brion. I was captivated, would spend several hours every Wednesday and Saturday listening to her daughters sing as we played the harpsichord. There was tea and chess and conversation. She knew her Molière, Montaigne, and Homer. It was more than a close relationship, more than a close friendship, but less than physical. She would sit on my lap and call me, Mon cher papa. One time, John Adams was there. He didn't like it. One of my diplomatic duties was to present the American cause to as many important people as possible who had influence at court. And where do you find them? The salons of Paris, hosted by the women of Paris. Madame Helvétius entertained on Tuesdays, Madame Geoffrin on Wednesdays. Every day was taken. Such a duty I had to attend all these dinners. Oh, they would last from 3 p.m. to midnight. Madame Helvétius would throw her arms around me and other guests, would recline on a divan, revealing more than just her foot. John Adams was there. He didn't like it. The French writer Fontenelle attended one of her dinners. Now, he was in his 90s. He looked at Madame Helvétius and exclaimed, "Ah, to be 70 again!" Ah. I was a widower at this time. She was a widow. I told her, I had a dream that my wife and your husband married in heaven, and they thought we should do as well here on earth. And she said, Monsieur Dr. Franklin, no. We remained friends. Cornwallis is defeated at Yorktown. Washington's military success and my diplomacy bringing the French Army and Navy, perhaps John Adams was right. The general and I did do it all. September 83, September 3rd, Treaty of Paris, ending the war and recognizing the United States. I signed the treaty. I wore the same suit of clothes I had at the Privy Council when I was humiliated. I thought the clothes deserved a little revenge. I've signed 5 major documents: Declaration of Independence, Treaty of Alliance with France, Treaty of Commerce with France, Treaty of Paris ending the war, the Constitution of the United States. No other single person did so. That's pretty good for a runaway printer's apprentice. I wrote to a friend once that life should end in a dramatic way like a stage play. I believe I have achieved such drama. One last story, and you'll know how this is going to end. As a member, I attended a meeting of the French Academy of Sciences. The revered French playwright Voltaire was there. A cry went up from the crowd, we should be introduced to one another. And so we bowed to one another. The crowd wanted more, so we took each other by the hand. The tumult continued for more. We must embrace in the French manner. Voltaire and I clasped arms and kissed each other on the cheek. And the cry went up, Qu'il est trop charmant. How charming it was. Oh, it was enchanting to see Solon and Sophocles embracing. John Adams was there. He didn't like it. When you come to Philadelphia, my door is always open. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben, or, RJ, thank you.
Yes.
I have just one question. What is your favorite living history program?
Franklin Delano Roosevelt.
Okay, thank you very much. Why? Maybe why?
Well, I have a good resemblance to him when I get the hat and the cigarette holder and all on. But he is such a character. He's my favorite president. And I agree with so much of what he was trying to do, especially the New Deal, and everything was going on. He's larger than life. He's just a huge individual. And it's a great joy doing him. I did him for the Democratic Convention for a little 5-minute address. I've been many places. A lot of people that lived through that time period want to see him one more time. And some actually thank him for what he did. You know, they'll come up and say, oh, thank you so much. I had one woman in tears one day. She was at the program and she said, and this was about the Civilian Conservation Corps, which young men were doing forestry work and all. One of the best government programs ever created. And she was crying. And she said, your CCC saved my brother. He was unemployed, wandering the streets, probably get arrested. He joined the Corps, got his health back, learned a trade because there were free classes in the evening on many trades. And the money he saved was sent home to his mother, who was a widow with 4 children. So he had an impact on people. And I think that's another thing about it, was that people were helped by the government. They were helped by the government. And Roosevelt raised taxes. They were like 80-some%, 1945, I think, and then went up to like 91% or something for a while. And that money was used for all the New Deal programs to help so many people. They started a food program and food stamps, and they had work programs, infrastructure programs. They spent a lot of money, more so if you do the math from what they spent for what it would be worth today, far more than what Obama was allowed to do by the Congress, because they were cheap and they wouldn't go as far as they should have. And now I see they're negotiating, trying to get the $2 trillion down to $800 million. No, you can't shortchange the program. It's a desperate need and must be done. And he did it. It just, I mean, the one, okay. Yes.
Thank you very much. And thanks for your presentation.
Oh, you're welcome. I love all the characters. It's just FDR is my favorite.
Yeah, okay.
Thanks, Diane. I have a quick question before we go to the group. Do you ever think about, especially with Benjamin Franklin, what he would be like if he were around now? Like, would he have been allowed to be as successful because he would have had a lot more people watching him? You know, would he have been like the kind of guy that just like did the talk show circuits? Like, what? Where would he have fit in?
He'd be all over the internet. He would have a podcast. He would have Facebook. He would be communicating that way for sure. Rolling Stone called me up one day and wanted to know about Franklin, because they were asking various people about other people that did other characters. And what position would he play if he was in the basketball league? I said he'd be the coach, because he always had a plan. He had a plan in his pocket. Whenever he went to meet a group of people, whether it was Congress or the legislature, whatever, he always had a plan available in case the topic came up. And compromise was his main political philosophy. So therefore, he would be the coach of the team. And there was also a little thing there. Remember when the football controversy, it wasn't quite inflated, right, with the Patriots
and Tom Brady, yeah.
And they made his comment that, well, you know, Ben's a Patriot, and because he would study all the things, and he would study the football, and you know, he would know about that, and so he was a Patriot.
That's awesome. All right, let's go to the audience. I am going to Debbie. Would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Hi. Basically, you know, when you listen to all that you recounted that Ben Franklin did, my question is, do you think he was like born with all that ability, or did he develop it through his curiosity?
I think both. I was watching on YouTube, and I like to watch some classical music. And this YouTube episode came up, and there's this young boy. I don't know whether he's 10 or 12 or something. He's sitting at a 4-manual pipe organ, playing the toccata from the 5th Symphony by Widor. And your hands are doing this. I mean, they're just all over the keyboard and the pedals. Of course, they're doing all that too. This kid, he has to be wired differently than me because I was barely able to get the piano when I was studying as a kid. There has to be a different wiring for people. And you know that some people who are very smart can be a little quirky, and they can be on what the psychologists call the spectrum, where they're not as sociable as they might be because of how they're wired. And so he was driven by his own wiring, and he was extremely curious, reading all the time. He would take, the deal was when he was apprenticed to his brother, James, at the print store, there was housing in the same building, but also there was a food allowance. And what he would do is he would eat slightly and save some of the extra money to buy more books. And he was writing, and a captain friend of his had seen some of his writing and sent it off to some people like the governor, and the governor was impressed. So he was reading at a level. Who of us read Plutarch's Lives when we were a kid? I don't think so. So he had something that nobody else in his family had. You know, it's like Einstein. He was born that way. There's no question about it. And there is, I told you earlier about the possibility that the amygdala in the brain, which deals with a lot of emotions and all, is a different size for people who are more conservative and people who are more liberal. So there is also a physical element to how we are put together. And there he was. And it's just, this is just a surface of all the things he studied and did. The man was a genius.
Right.
And he set a schedule. Okay, I'm going to do this today. And tomorrow I'm going to do this. He's very organized. He had a pride. Yes. He had a vanity. Yes. But what the work he did was amazing.
Unbelievable.
There's a story about a chaplain for the militia. Now it's a Quaker colony, so the government couldn't support armed people, but the people could form one of their own. And the chaplain came to Franklin one day and said, the men aren't coming to prayer service. What can I do? And so Ben says, well, I'll tell you what. You tell the men that they'll get their daily rum ration right after prayer service. It worked.
That worked. All right, we got another question for you. So Marky, do you want to ask your question?
Sure. I have to say I really enjoyed your talk. Thank you. What I'd like to know is you didn't think very highly of John Adams. I wondered what he thought of you.
Here's the way John Adams worked. In the beginning, he's your friend. But if there's any kind of competition, then he doesn't like you so well. John's a very emotional person, very smart, very wise. Sometimes, as Ben said, out of his senses. He and Abigail we'd call them puritanical. Today, they were, And so would they go over to France and see what Ben's hanging around with all the ladies and all, and they go, no, bad. He and John Adams were traveling together one time, and so they were in this room together. And Ben liked fresh air. One of his health things was to stand naked in front of the window for fresh air coming over you. He liked that. John didn't like it. It was too cold. He'd want to close the window, and Franklin would open it. So what Franklin did was he sat there on the bed and he said, now, John, let me tell you my theory about the common cold and windows and air. And the more he talked, Adams fell asleep. So the window stayed open.
I love it. All right, let's, Mary Ann P., you want to ask your question?
I loved your presentation, and I was wondering, first of all, it seems to me that there must have been 40 hours in a day back when you were alive, when Ben Franklin was alive, because he got so much done. And yet it took 2 months to go from the colonies to England and 2 months to come back. And I wondered if you thought today, as the speed of communications has increased, has diplomacy decreased?
Well, there is still diplomacy going on. Of course, previous State Department wasn't very good at it because they had such incompetent people. They're always back behind the scenes, there is something going on. There were negotiations with the Taliban. Is that the Taliban in Afghanistan? Whoever those are.
Yes.
There has been agreements. It doesn't matter what it is. If it's China, they sometimes have to go through the back door. The Cuban Missile Crisis, it was looking very, very serious. It could develop into a war. And so a journalist went through a back door with a Russian diplomat, and they started talking, trying to soothe the whole situation, trying to figure out what did Khrushchev really believe? Because one moment he seemed to be reconciling, the next minute the conservatives must have pushed him on the council and he's bombastic again. But these two managed to get some clear information back and forth between the two. And we didn't know about that at the time. We were watching TV going, oh my God, it's the end of the world. But they were trying desperately to subdue it. So there are any number of examples like that where negotiations are going on. We have no idea what's happening, and they're trying to. Now, diplomacy is a little balanced there. When Franklin was talking to the French foreign minister, he made a comment one time, we should sign this treaty right away because Congress could any minute reconcile with England. Well, I knew that was totally false. It wasn't going to happen, but he didn't. And I was hoping that little pressure might make him move a little faster. So your diplomacy is, here's part of it outside, but then we're holding something behind our back, and see if we can get the advantage over the other guy.
Wow. And there's always Dennis Rodman going to North Korea. You remember that?
Yeah, yes.
Who knows what he averted from him going there?
You never know.
All right, we have time for one more question. Joyce Porter, you want to unmute and ask your question?
It seems to me like Franklin should have been president. Was that ever a close possibility? Was he ever considered?
No, he was too old. And he passed before the first president ever got inaugurated. So there was a time where the Constitutional Convention, people said, Ben, you got to be the president of the convention. We got to get this done. And Ben said, no. See, oftentimes when I say something, people think I'm joking. Oh. You need General Washington. He has a demeanor to be able to handle the presidency of this convention, which is going to be very difficult. So he passed that on to George.
So he was considerably older than the rest of...
Oh, yes, he was considerably older because, Alexander Hamilton was a mere pup. He comes over, he's 19 or 20 or something. Yeah. A lot of them were fairly young at that time.
So I guess we'll end with that last question. When do you think Lin-Manuel Miranda is going to write a musical about you?
Well, I don't know if there's as much of a story there that's as exciting as the Revolution, though.
Every song could be a different invention. Singing things clearly bifocals. You never know.
I don't know if we'd... one time he had a little raft and he had a kite and he let the kite draw him across this body of water to a friend of his on the other side who had his clothes. He was always playing around with that. He and Jefferson were always talking about science, and he and George Washington, they'll go out and they'll observe something, bubbles coming up to the bottom of a creek and wonder, what is that? And
curiosity.
It was the Enlightenment period where science was important. And people read about it, people wrote about it, ordinary people wanted to know about it. The curiosity of the Enlightenment is something we can't even imagine now because a lot of what's happening now, people have just sort of shut off their mind.
All right, RJ or Ben, do you have one last thing you'd like to tell our audience?
One last thing.
Before we leave the program.
One last thing before we go. I would say that the best part of his political philosophy was the word compromise, something we seem to have forgotten. Our positions get so hardened that we get stalemate. Now, Ben wanted a single house legislature because he said two of them will just fight. We'll never get anything done. But of course, if you have the wrong party in that's crazy, then you got no stopgap at all, except maybe the Electoral College, who could overturn an election if they wanted to if some demagogue got in. But that was before politics and gerrymandering, which the founders never knew anything about. They didn't think there would be liberal and conservative, and the finest gentlemen would be elected, and they'd be in the legislature. They would select the finest gentleman to be the Electoral College, and things would move along smoothly. Well, they kind of missed that one a little bit. Compromise is it.
I love that word, compromise. Well, thank you, RJ. Thank you, Benjamin Franklin. Thank you, everyone who is here in the audience. We do have 3 more Mondays after this. So if you want to see what's coming up for the next 3 weeks, you can go right to our website at www.19thcentury.org. And if you'd like to help us support these amazing presenters and keep putting on these great programs, you can donate right on our homepage at www.19thcentury.org. For everyone here at the 19th Century Charitable Association, we hope you enjoyed this program and have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.
Good luck.